As we've gone through another week, I just feel like it's in order for all of us to take a collective deep breath. And a reminder, unless you're one of the children that just left, all of you have successfully made it through swine flu, bird flu, H1N1, SARS, MERS, Legionnaire's disease, and Ebola, and a few other things. You'll make it through the next few months as well. There's at least a little bit, and I'm not saying all of it. I don't have my tinfoil hat on right now. I have it at home. It's up in the closet. There is a little bit of an effort to try to keep everyone just scared enough to keep the ratings up. Let me at least make that suggestion. And so everyone, let's just not live so much on the edge that other people. I'm thankful that people are going to Target and Walmart to buy 2 years worth of toilet paper. I don't know why. I can't figure it out. Are they wrapping it around their head to wear as a mask? I don't understand exactly what's happening. But I think we'll be okay. Thanks, Libby, for the song about the invitation. That's what we're speaking about this morning. Reading in the book of Matthew, chapter 22, where invitations come into focus. Now, there are many invitations we get in life. Some are welcomed. I used to remember when I was a kid, occasionally, I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where we could afford birthday parties, but occasionally we'd have a birthday party somewhere, and that was always good news. So some of the invitations we get in life, some are welcomed. We look forward to a get-together with friends. We look forward to other things. There are other invitations that we get that aren't quite so welcome. But we would be offended if we didn't get it. Your cousin's daughter's getting married. You don't really want to give up a Saturday to go to that wedding. But if you didn't get an invitation, you'd say, what am I, chopped liver? And there's those in between. I thought I was a friend. How come I didn't get that? And then some invitations we don't want at all. Ever got an invitation from your doctor for your colonoscopy? You don't want that. You're invited. I get these in the mail. You're invited to join us for this timeshare presentation. You don't really want that either. This week, first time in probably, a decade at least, forget what day it was this week, my house was picked out. I got invited by the Jehovah's Witnesses this week. Came to my door. They're invitations we don't want. In Matthew 22, starting with verse 8, we read this. There it is. Then he said to his slaves, the wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet. Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot, throw him into outer darkness, for there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many, hang on, I got to go back here. For many are invited, but few are chosen. This is one of those difficult passages I would like to pick our way through just a little bit. First thing is, this sense of just because you're invited doesn't mean there's a guarantee about anything. This text references the Jews. And it's saying that, yes, all the Jews were my chosen people and were invited to be my special guests. But it starts off by saying right away, those I invited did not deserve to come. There's a sense here, we're not explained why, but whatever the Jews were selected for, they had failed in their task. And the response of the king in this story is, go invite everybody then. Go to the alleys, go to the back streets, go to the other side of town, and invite everyone you find. Now, first of all, let me just say a couple things. I do believe God's grace goes to every single person. But that doesn't mean that some don't have some inherent advantages over some other people. You've heard me say it before. I was raised in the church from earliest age. And then even when my mom moved back to Ohio, to her hometown, after my dad had left, it was still in the church that she had grown up in. So I was raised by a wonderful mom in the church. And I mentioned before, I had a grandparent on either side of the family, a grandfather over here, a grandmother over here. It was easy for me to be a Christian. I had a grandfather and a grandmother who not only talked the talk, but walked the walk. There was no daylight between their words and their actions. My grandfather ended up having one of those really good jobs, and even through the 1930s. And at his visitation, there were many people that came and said, your grandfather in 1936, in 1935, in 1938, found me a job. He's just one of those people that was very easy to want to emulate. And the same with the grandmother on the other side. It was easier for me because of the example I had. But there's no guarantee there either. I have free will. I could have rejected. I know a few people, and I know everybody here also knows people who grew up with every opportunity. Some might be spiritual, others it might be financial, others it might be education-wise, and they did nothing but squander the opportunities that they had. And that's sad when you see someone walk away. God's response is that everyone is invited. It's not, this text I think is a little misleading. It's not as if God was surprised. What am I going to do now? Boy, my people have rejected me. Oops, I'll do plan B. And plan B is to let those people from the other side of the tracks, in that world's the Gentiles, in. The New Testament tells us, Paul tells us, that the Gentiles were always in focus from the very first effort by God. The Jews were to be a light. The Jews were to be an example. The Jews were to be a lighthouse, that people were to emulate them. They failed in their task. They took the advantages they had and selfishly hoarded them. That is always a continual temptation by God's people, to hoard the advantages that we have. As good as sometimes we have it, don't confuse an advantage for a guarantee. I bet all of you know someone else in your history. It could be a friend that you knew whose parents were a mess. And their sisters and their brothers all turned out to be just followed after their parents. But there was that one sibling that had that one lifeline and grabbed onto it. So the good news this morning is everyone here has an invitation. Everyone has been invited. Revelation makes it plain. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them, and they with me. So you are invited. In our story in Matthew, the king went out, made invitations everywhere, and pretty soon the wedding hall was filled. Now, when I was married here in the suburbs of Chicago. My family's in Ohio. You look at our wedding video, which my wife doesn't always like. She says I look like I'm 16. Her side was fairly full. The groom's side was scattered at best. Her side, we came back in after the wedding so we could personally dismiss every row so we could be sure we talked to everyone. Her family's Italian. I had to hug everyone on her side. She had to shake hands with the few people on my side. When you're married, what a wonderful idea to have a wedding hall filled with people just to celebrate my day. And then a few years later, when I was paying for my daughter's wedding, let's keep the number down a little bit. Here, everyone responded to the invitation. See, God offers us grace. God offers us peace. Gospels also tell us His yoke is easy and His burden is light. We live in a world where the burdens imposed by the world out there are heavy. The world will take as much as you want to give them and will not leave you in a better position. You'd think that'd be the end of the story. God invited all these people. He went to the back alleys. He went into the poor neighborhoods and filled His wedding hall full of guests. That should be the note of celebration, but it's not. When the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. Friend, how did you get in here without the proper clothes? The man was speechless. What does that mean? In that day, wedding feasts were a cause for celebration. So here's the story. Let's say I'm the dad. I'm not going to pick on anybody today. Let's say my daughter's here and she becomes of marriageable age. I was always a little disappointed that I got a daughter because I wanted a son, because 2,000 years ago the son would have had more economic impact. So you want boys, but if you got a girl, what you'd want to do then is when it came time for her to be married, you would let the community know that she's of marriageable age. And it's not like she could pick. I'm the dad, I could pick. And by the way, I like that system. And then depending on my daughter, the bidding would open up. I would find a suitable a mate, but I would want to be sure they have means economically, and so let the bidding begin. And over here, this guy, he offers me 8 goats for my daughter. I'm slightly offended because my daughter's a 10-goat girl, clearly. And I'm waiting for that. And so I finally get my 10-goat price, and I introduce them, and I say, by the way, this is going to be your husband, and they are betrothed now. The agreement is made. They're not married yet. They're agreed to be married. And usually then the young man would look at his wife and say, I'm going now to prepare a place for you. Does that language sound familiar? And he would go and begin construction, usually above his family home or maybe behind the family home, a room for he and his wife. When he was done with the room, the wedding would begin. So you did not know exactly, there was no date, there was no August 12th is the date. It was when he was done. And the job of the bride and the bridesmaids were to stay ready. And when he's done, all his family would come up over the hillside, march in a procession, and the weddings would be feasts that lasted for days. And before you think, oh, that's terrible, it goes on today. I grew up, Marion, Ohio, very heavy Amish area. If you go west of town, there's a big Amish community. One county over, Holmes County. Alex knows it's the heaviest Amish county in the country. No, not Pennsylvania, it's Ohio. And if you're married in the Amish community, I would get married, and then for the first 2 weeks or so, I would have one night in the home of my friends. And they would give us a dinner, they would give us a present, we would spend the night in their home, and then the next day we'd move on to the next home and start the whole process over again. Imagine the first 2 to 3 weeks of your married life and a guest in a different home every night. I'm not a fan of that system. The bridal party was to stay ready. Remember, this was a big celebration. This was some of the biggest events in the community of that time. Occasionally you will hear someone mistakenly say, one thing we know about the Apostle Paul, he was never married. Wrong, he was married. Because he would never advance beyond many of his peers, as he stated in Philippians, if he wasn't married. You didn't advance anywhere in the ancient Jewish world unless you were married. They held that kind of high esteem. And yet this king comes back in, and there's a guest there that he goes, how did you get in? His response would have been, I was invited. The question was not whether he received an invitation. The question was what he did with the invitation. Whoever the guest was, he was unprepared to celebrate with everyone else. He was sloppy. He was dirty. He was thoughtless. He didn't put any thought into what he was wearing. We live in a very similar culture to that today. My understanding is there's a website or something called People of Walmart that is a rundown of some very special people and their very special clothing choices that they made before they went to Walmart. You don't have to do that. Go to an airport and look at what people choose to wear when they get on a plane today. I've been to a wedding where one of the people comes to the wedding in shorts and a t-shirt. This was a culture of honor and shame. Underdressing for a celebration would have been a way of dishonoring that family and would have brought shame on you. However this person was dressed, however this person came to this feast, we don't understand what this text was about. The ancient Jewish world would have known. He was underdressed, he was underprepared for the occasion. And because he was underprepared, it didn't honor the wedding feast. That's what this text is getting to. It's not a call for dress. I hope to have a picture next week. I said last week, I have to always watch what I say, that I would look ridiculous in a Hawaiian shirt and Chuck Taylors. Someone here took a picture of me and did Photoshop and put me in a Hawaiian shirt and Chuck Taylors, and I'm getting that picture forwarded to me, and I'll put it up there next week. And you can see how thankful you should be that I'm in a Hawaiian shirt and Chuck Taylors. This is not a text that calls for a certain level of dress, but a reminder that even us who have received an invitation, we are called to a certain level of faithfulness, a certain level of morality, a certain level of obedience. Not to live out of fear that we somehow won't be accepted, or we won't be invited, or we have to dress that way in order to get invited. This text is very clear. Everyone's invited. The back alleys, the wrong side of town, the Gentiles, everybody was invited. And everyone is free to come and enjoy the benefits. but we're still called to live faithfully as a response. We live in a world that doesn't want any expectations, any level of conditions placed upon their life. The manner which we live is important. We are called to participate. The invitation, while great, is not quite as important as what we do with the invitation. We get those invitations too. Will you come to the wedding? RSVP by a certain date. And the little card. Do you want the chicken? Do you want the beef? A few years ago, we got invited to a wedding. We know the person who is getting married very well, one of Adam's really, really good friends. And we got the RSVP, we got the invitation. And it was at the Oakbrook Weston Hotel. The reception was in ballroom A, B, C, D, and E. You think I'm joking? And we didn't get the card that said, do you want the beef? Do you want whatever? Well, we got to the wedding, and the reason why is all 425 guests got the filet and the lobster. Yes. As I was eating, I was doing the math in my head. And I was talking to my wife. You know what? I bet this had to cost at least, and I do math. No, wait a minute. No, add to that. And that was the copy in my head. The invitation, those kind of invitations, we need to fill something out, or we'll get there and they'll say, sorry, we don't have a place for you at the table. We didn't get your response. So how do we participate? Scripture is fairly clear on a lot of these. To love your neighbor as yourself. They will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. That we love our neighbor as ourselves. That we live life where we do not return evil for evil, but return good for the evil we experience. We participate by living a life of holiness. We participate as we forgive as Christ forgave us. We participate as we live in the church, the body of Christ, and love each other. I think of all the people, and I didn't know it then, all the people that participated in my growing up with my single mom. From Roger, who taught 7th grade Sunday school. That is a journey through hell, teaching 7th graders Sunday school. To Mark, who always prayed for me. To Bob, who I got a certain age, for some reason started, not all the time, a couple times a year, he always wanted to come and shake my hand. And when he did, I stuck my hand out quick, because sometimes when he shook my hand, there would be a folded green piece of paper in the handshake. I liked folded green pieces of paper in the handshakes. So what keeps us from participating? I don't think we purposely rebel against it. Oh, there have always been sermons about all the bad things that people do, all the great sins that take people away from Christ. There are, of course, great sins that take people away. It's just, I don't think that's what trips most people up. But let me tell you about the most dangerous one. Drift. Thoughtless drift. Thoughtlessness. not being intentional, not living purposefully, not being careful. In the first years after my parents got divorced, my dad lived in southern Indiana, a town called Connorsville. He had a boat. Now you go down there, there's a lake called Brookville Lake, which is a very big lake. That wasn't around until 1974, 75. In the first couple of years, we'd go to visit them in the summer. We'd go to a little town, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and we put our boat in the Ohio River. And there's a town called Rising Sun, and there's a number of towns along the river there. And all I remember is we'd start off, and it seemed like we'd go for 4 hours east on the river. And he'd put the anchor down, and we'd jump in the river and swim. But he said, hey, he'd go off to the side. We'd never be in the middle of the river and swim. First of all, too deep to throw the anchor. Second of all, barges would hit us. The other reason is even with the anchor, the boat would drift. And then it'd come time after that, we'd pull the anchor up. And even though we went east like for 4 hours, we'd turn around and go west for 20 minutes and be right back where we started. Because of the current. Some of you might be fishermen and have taken a charter out in Lake Michigan or Lake Erie sometime. And one of the ways that they fish is they'll go out to a certain area, they'll just turn the engine off and let the drift happen. And then go back to where they started. You don't know, you're out, there's nothing really to see. There's no landmark you're really going for, but the drift takes place. And that's funny because most of us have a hobby, I bet, where we work with a plan. Some of you I see sometimes, I've seen people come in and they're working on something, and I see I know enough, they're knitting. They go, no, I don't knit, I crochet. I have no idea what the difference between those two are, but anyway. And I go, what are you working with? It's a scarf. It's a blanket. It's a pot holder. It's a sweater. You have a plan. You know what you're doing. You know where you're going. Some of you might have other things. You work with models. You have glue. And you're making a P-51 fighter plane. And you have very precision. I've seen you have a tackle box. And you have elaborate lures. Others of us chase around a little white ball and obsess over our swing. But yet other parts of life, important parts of life, we just never think about. The problem is we have more important things to do. We always have more important things to do. And so Jesus is an important part of my life. And right now, he's number 3. But as soon as I get done with this and done with this, he'll move up to number 1. The trouble is, never moves up to number 1. Because something always replaces number 2. Something always replaces number 1. And we forget that Matthew tells us in chapter 6, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you as well. We all live lives where carefulness and thoughtfulness will be a benefit. Some of us at age 25 or 26 or 27, we took that first little bit, we saved a couple paychecks or parts of paychecks, and we got that first 1,000 or something, and we put it in a savings account, or we put it in a mutual fund, or we did one of those things, and we looked at it 2 years later and said, well, this is a waste of my time. It was $2,000, and now it's 2 years later, and it's $2,223. Whoop-de-doo. And they checked it when they're 33. Well, it's $3,500. I mean, that's a lot of stuff for just another 1,000. They looked at 43. Well, it's $6,000 now, but I really thought it'd be more than that. And they looked at 53. Well, I thought they added a little bit to it, but it's still a waste of time. And all of a sudden it's $16,000. Well, this is coming to something. We're parents of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 7-year-olds. And you say, my life doesn't change. I do the laundry, and then 3 days later, I'm seeing the same shirt. A week later, I'm seeing the same sheets, and I get it clean, and I'm doing it all over again. And they never say thank you, and ask them how they're doing. Fine. How's your classes? Fine. How's your friends? Fine. Can't you say more than that? Why are you bothering me? I mean, we get the whole thing. And this is really meaningless. And maybe it's at age 21, they're junior in college, or maybe it's when they're at the hospital with the birth of their first child, you're a grandparent now, and they look at you and say, Mom, Dad, thank you. Then it's all worth it. Everything truly valuable in life doesn't give you a payoff that day. It doesn't even give you a payoff the next week or the next year. It might not even give you a payoff in that decade. We've all received the invitation. What's more important than the invitation is what you do with it.